Hey guys, it's been a while since I did a crash course, and I realized that I didn't have an introduction to JSON on my channel. And JSON is extremely important in web development, especially if you're working with RESTful APIs and sending data back and forth. It's pretty much replaced XML in that area. Now, I know a lot of you already understand JSON, but I do have a bunch of subscribers that are just getting into JavaScript and programming in general, so this is geared more towards them, but feel free to watch this as kind of a refresher. Alright, so we're going to take a look at some slides, and then we'll jump in and we'll start to work with JavaScript objects and JSON. So what is JSON? It stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it's essentially a lightweight data interchange format, and it's used to send data back and forth to a server as text. It's actually based on JavaScript object literals, so if you've used JavaScript in the past, you may have worked with something that resembles JSON already. If you've never written or even heard of JSON before, I think after you watch this, you'll be quite surprised at how easy it is to understand and read and write. So as I said, JSON has arguably replaced XML, and it's often used with Ajax, which actually stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So it's a little ironic that Ajax now uses JSON more than it does XML, which is actually in its name. And if you don't know what Ajax is used for, it's used to send data back and forth from client and server without having to refresh the page in the browser. And later on, I'm going to show you how we can make an Ajax request to a JSON file and output the content in the browser. Alright, JSON can also be parsed with almost any modern programming language, either natively or through libraries. So even if you're not a JavaScript developer, learning JSON is extremely relevant. And I would also suggest that any programmer should learn JavaScript anyways. Alright, so let's take a look at the different data types that can be used with JSON. So we can use numbers, just like regular JavaScript. If we use a numeric with no quotes around it, that'll be looked at as a number. And there's no difference between decimals or floats or integers. They're all looked at as numbers. Of course, we have strings, which is a string of Unicode characters. These must be wrapped in double quotes. We can also use Boolean values, which are true and false. We can use arrays, which are ordered lists of 0 or more values. Arrays are also wrapped in square brackets, just like in regular JavaScript and just about any other programming language. We can also embed child objects, which are an unordered collection of key value pairs, and we can have multi-tiered objects embedded in the JSON object. And lastly, we have null, which is an empty value. Now, when working with object literals, we can use any standard JavaScript data type, including functions and dates, but if it's specified as JSON, values need to fit into one of these. Okay, we do have supersets of JSON, such as bson, which is used by MongoDB, that they do allow additional data types, but that's beyond this course. Alright, so before we jump in and we start to write some JavaScript in JSON, I want to just look at some of the rules that the syntax follows. Okay, so JSON works by using key value pairs, and in this example we have an object with one key value pair. Name is the key and Brad is the value. Alright, now notice that both the key and the value are using double quotes. If this was a JavaScript object literal, we wouldn't need the quotes around the key, just the string value. But if we wanted this to be parsed as JSON, as valid JSON, then we need the double quotes around both the key and the value. Alright, if it's valid JSON, it also must follow the specific data types that we just described. And now if you want, you can create a file that is strictly for JSON. It must be valid and it has to have a .json file extension. And then the MIME type associated with JSON is application/JSON. So if you're working with, let's say, a RESTful API and you want to send JSON, you can use this type in the header. Alright, so let's take a look at a really simple example. This is a single JSON object for a person. It's wrapped in curly braces and uses the key value pairs. The first pair, which is the name, uses a string as the value, a string of Brad Traversy. Okay, it must use double quotes. And the second one is a number, and notice that the number doesn't have quotes around it. The next is an address, which is actually an embedded object with a street and a city. And then the last is an array of strings. Okay, so this is a very simple example that uses multiple data types. Alright, so that's a brief introduction to what JSON is. Now we're going to jump in and we're going to actually look at and write some code. Alright guys, so I have an index.html file here that I just have in a folder called JSON Sandbox, and it just has your basic HTML head and body tags, and then we have this script, these script tags in the body. This is where we're going to write our JavaScript. So it's really important to understand that a JavaScript object and a JSON object are a little different, and we went over some of this in the slides, and you saw that with JSON you have to have double quotes around both the key and the value. When you're working with standard JavaScript objects, you usually don't, but you can. So what I'm going to do here is just create a variable called person and set that to an object, which is represented with curly braces. And in here we're going to say name, and we're going to set that to a string called Brad. Okay, so this is actually a JavaScript object. This is not valid JSON. So what we can do here is we can access, I'm just going to use console log. You can use alert. Well, actually you can't use alert because it's an object. But what this will do is just log to the console down here. If you're using Chrome, you just hit F12 and that'll open up the dev tools, and you just want to go to the console. Firefox also has it, and I believe every browser does. Okay, so what we want to do here is just log out person. Alright, so if we reload this, you'll see that it gives us an object, and it has the key value pair, name, and Brad. Now, this works in JavaScript. In fact, this is what you would do, but this is not valid JSON. If we go to jasonlint.com, which is a JSON validator, and we take, actually let's just go ahead and put in here name Brad, and we say validate JSON, it's going to tell us that this is not valid. And the reason for that is because it doesn't have double quotes around the key. So if we go ahead and do that and click validate, it says valid JSON. Now we can in fact go over here and put double quotes like that, and then if we go back and reload, this is still going to work. Alright, but I'm going to leave those quotes off. Now when we log this out, it's logging out the object. If we want to access a certain property such as name, which is the only property it has, then we can just do .name, and if we reload we get Brad. We can add on to this, and let's say age 35, and then down here we can say person.age, and that'll give us 35. Now when using JavaScript objects, we can set the data type of the value to anything that we can do in JavaScript, even a function. So if we wanted to say email and set that to a function, and then just return, let's say brad@gmail.com, and then go down here and say person.email, which is a function, so we need to put in our parentheses, reload, and we get brad@gmail. Alright, and this is certainly not valid JSON, although it is a valid JavaScript object. So if we go over here and we try to do that, let's say email, and we'll set that to function, and we'll return brad@gmail, and we try and run that. Of course, that is not valid. Alright, it has to be one of the data types that we specified in the slides, which is number, string, boolean, null, and array, and object. Okay, it has to be one of those. Alright, so I'm just going to take this email off right here, this function, and I want to show you that we can prepare this as JSON if we wanted to send it through Ajax to a server, or do something that requires it to be valid JSON. Okay, we can actually change it to a JSON string. So to do that, we can use a function called stringify. So what I'll do here is just say person equals JSON.stringify, and then pass in that person object, and then down here let's console log person. Okay, so we'll go back here and reload, and now you can see it gives us a string that is formatted correctly. It has quotes around the keys and around the string, but not around the number. Okay, so that's valid JSON we could send to a server. Now, if you want to take this JSON string and turn it back to an object, that's easy as well. And you would do that because if we try to do person.name and reload, we're going to get undefined. Okay, so what we want to do is parse it back into an object. So for that, we would use json.parse. Okay, and we'll pass in person. And now, if we reload, we're able to get Brad. Okay, it's back to an object. All right, so I'm just going to comment these out here, and then I'm going to add some more stuff to this. So let's say we want address, and we'll set that to an object, which will have a street. Say 5 Main Street, which isn't my real address, by the way. And then city, we'll say Boston. All right, in addition to that, let's create an array. We'll say children, set that to an array of strings, and we have Brianna and Nicholas. Okay, now if we wanted to access the street, then we would have to do person.address.street, okay, because it's another level in, so we have to specify that we want to go into the address object and get this street property. So let's reload, and we get 5 Main Street. All right, now let's say we wanted to access Brianna in the children array. For that, we could do person.children, and since it's an array, we're going to open up some brackets and say we want the first one, which has an index of 0. So if we reload that, we get Brianna. If we want Nicholas, we can say 1, and we get Nicholas. Okay, and if you know JavaScript, then you know that arrays are 0-based. All right, so what I want to do now is create an array of objects. So I'm going to go down here and say var people, and we're going to set this to an array. And inside here we'll have some objects. Let's give the people a name and an age. Okay, and then we'll put another one. These should be separated by a comma. This one will say name John, age 40. Okay, and then we'll do one more. We'll say name, oops, Sarah, and we'll say age 25. So we have this array of people objects. So if we wanted to access, let's say, John, what we could do is we can say console log, oops, people, which is the name of the array, and then we want to get the first one, I'm sorry, the index 1, because it's 0, 1, 2. So we want John, which is 1. Let's go ahead and save that and reload, and it gives us the whole object. If we wanted just the, let's say, the age, we could say dot age, and that'll give us John's age. Now, you may want to loop through an array and then do something with the output. So for that, what we would do is we could use a for loop. I'm just going to comment that out. We could use a for loop, so we're going to say var I equals 0. We're going to set I to 0 by default. And then we're going to say as long as I is less than people.length. So the length of the array, which in this case is 3. And then we just want to say I++, because after each iteration, we want it to increment by 1. Okay, so all I'm going to do here is console.log, and we're going to say people, and for the index, we're going to use the current iteration, which is the I variable. All right, so let's save that and reload, and you can see it goes through and it outputs each object. If we just wanted, let's say, the name, we could do .name, reload, and we could do .age or whatever other properties there are. All right, now you may want to output these onto your screen in the browser in your application. So if we wanted to do that, we could go up into the HTML, and let's create a UL. We'll give it an ID of people, And we're not going to put anything inside. That's going to be generated through the JavaScript. All right, let me just comment that out. And then we should be able to do, what we'll do is set a variable of output and set that to nothing by default. And then, actually, no, that should be outside of this. That should be here. Okay, so we set the output to nothing, and then each iteration, we're going to take that output variable and we're going to append onto it. So we're going to use plus equals. And we want to append some li tags. And then in here, we just want to concatenate, and we want to put in, people. Let's do people I dot name. Okay, so that's going to go through. It's going to append to this output through every iteration, and then after that, what we want to do is say document dot get element by ID. And we want to grab the element with the ID of people, which is the UL we created. And then we just want to say dot inner HTML, and we're going to set that equal to the output. Okay, and we'll reload, and now you'll see that it's outputting onto the screen. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create a JSON file, and we're going to create a people array in JSON and then fetch that data through Ajax and then output it onto the screen. So let's create a new file here, and we're going to call this people.json. Okay, now this has to be valid JSON, so we're going to put in our curly braces, and then we're going to set a key of people. Make sure you have double quotes around that, and set that to an array. Okay, and then what I'll do is go to this array we created and grab all these. Okay, we'll paste that in, and right away Adam knows that this isn't valid. Okay, it's not valid because these keys do not have double quotes around them. So let's go ahead and just change that. All right, so now that should be valid. We can go ahead and check it if we want to copy that, paste it in JSON lint and validate, and you can see down here that it is valid. So let's save that, and then back in our index file, let's see, I'm gonna just comment everything out here, and I'm keeping it so you guys have a reference to go back and check if you want. All right, but what we want to do now is send a GET request to that people.json file. And once we get it, we want to output the data. Now I'm going to open up, let's see, where is it? I thought right here. So this is the W3 Schools site, which is an awesome site for reference for all kinds of technologies. But this is showing us how to make an HTTP request through JavaScript. Now this is much easier if you use jQuery or a library like Axios or something. It's much fewer lines of code, but I don't want to include any external libraries, so we're just going to use JavaScript. All right, so let's grab this, and we're going to put that here, and I'll try to explain what's going on here. So your browser has this XML HTTP request object, so we're going to access that and put that into this variable. All right, then we're going to take that variable and we're going to say onReadyStateChange equals a function, and then we want to check for the ready state and the status. Ready state should be 4, which means that the response has been captured, so we can use it. And then status, this is an HTTP status of 200, which means everything went okay. All right, and then once we get that, we can then grab the response. Now down here, we're going to say xHTTP, or whatever you call this variable, .open, and then say we want to make a GET request to a specific file or a specific URL. In this case, we're just getting people.json. Okay, and then we finally just want to call send. So let's go back up here, and I'm going to get rid of this for now. And we want to console.log, and we want to log the xHTTP response text, because that's where the response is stored. So let's go ahead and save that and go back to our application and reload. Now it's telling us that the XHR cannot load because basically we're not using a host. We're calling this from the file system. We're not calling it from an actual domain. And that's just a security protocol that Chrome uses. So what we want to do is we need some kind of server. If you have, let's say, XAMPP installed or something like that, where you can use your local host and you can just upload this to your web root, then you could do that. But another solution is to use Node.js and install a module called Live Server. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to just open up, I'll just use my standard Windows command prompt. Okay, and then I'm just going to navigate to that folder, which I think is in Sandbox. Let's see, yeah, CD JSON Sandbox. Okay, you want to go wherever you have this index HTML. All right, and then you need to have Node.js installed. So if you don't have that, just go to nodejs.org. Go ahead and download it and install it. It's just a simple Windows installer. Same with Mac. If you're on Linux, you can use your package manager. But once you get that installed, you'll have a command called npm. And then what you want to do is say npm install -g live-server. Okay, and that'll install the live server module. And it's installing it globally so that you can access it from anywhere. So now all we have to do to run this on our server is go to the correct folder and say live-server. Okay, and that should open up your application on port 8080. Okay, so now we're running our index.html in a server. So if we open up the console, now you'll see that it's actually getting the data. Okay, ignore this right here. Actually, that should go away. So we're now able to access this response. So let's put this in a variable instead of just logging it. We'll say var response equals that. And then we can see that there is a key called people, which is an array. So let's try to console log response.people. Now that's going to give us undefined, and the reason for that is because this is formatted as a JSON string. So it doesn't know what to do with this. So what we need to do is just wrap the response in json.parse. Okay, once we do that, it'll bring it to a JavaScript object which we can access like this. So now you can see it gives us the people object. All right, now I want to do the same thing and just output it up here. So what we can do is grab this. Okay, copy that. Comment this out. And let's paste it in. And again, we're creating a variable called output. We're going to loop through people.length. Now we haven't set people yet, so what we want to do is, actually we'll just do it here. We'll say var people equals the response that came in dot people. Okay, so now we can just loop through it. Let's get rid of that. We can add each person or each name in the people array to the output, and then we'll output it into the people, the element that has the people ID. So let's save that, and now you'll see that we're getting this info from the people.json file. If we were to add another one, let's say name Jeff and age 20. Save that, and you can see that that will get added. Since we're using live server, which actually uses live reload, I didn't even have to update it. I didn't even have to refresh it. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and stop here. Hopefully this gave you guys some insight into JSON, JavaScript objects, and Ajax. Alright, so that's it, and if you're not subscribed, please do so. If you like this, also leave it a like, a dislike if you don't like it, and I will see you next time.